Man is evil by nature, unless he needs to be good. Throughout history, humanity has shown a worrying tendency towards cruelty. We are often cold, selfish, and act cruelly, even when it brings us no benefit. John Stuart Mill once said, "All that bad people need to achieve their aims is for good people to stand by and do nothing." This means that in times of great injustice, only a small group of people commit the terrible acts. However, these people usually manage to act because the majority of others choose to do nothing to stop it. How often do great injustices happen because we choose to ignore or remain silent? Tolstoy believed that most of the time we know what is right and wrong. That's because we don't spend our days thinking about difficult philosophical or ethical dilemmas. Instead, we go about our lives based on a common sense of morality, which usually guides us to do what is right. Although I'm not sure if Tolstoy is right, if he is, that would be a big disadvantage for the devils, don't you think? In Letters from a Devil to His Apprentice by C.S. Lewis, the character Screwtape, an experienced demon, offers an interesting insight into everyday wickedness. In the book, C.S. Lewis describes how Screwtape gives advice to his nephew Wormwood to lead a so-called patient man away from God and goodness, towards error and cruelty. Screwtape explains that even if demons can't convince a person that something morally wrong is right, they can make them feel that morality isn't important. We are often attracted to ideas because they seem useful or impressive, rather than because we really believe in them rationally. For this reason, Screwtape recommends that Wormwood makes the patient think that reflections on morality, God, or ethics have no practical value, that they are distant and irrelevant things. Screwtape insists that under no circumstances should the patient think deeply about what is right or wrong. Instead, they should focus only on what seems practical or urgent. If the patient starts to reflect on moral or religious issues, Wormwood should distract them by directing their attention to simple and immediate things, such as what they're going to eat for lunch or the routine concerns of the day. The idea is to make people indifferent to anything that involves values or principles. They may say they believe in something, but if they don't put it into practice, it's as if those values don't even exist. Screwtape's aim, in his guidelines, is to ensure that humans never really commit themselves to any ethical position. In the end, they end up acting as if they don't believe in anything, without even realizing it. It's not necessary for a person to completely reject their moral values. It's enough for them to be distracted from them repeatedly, especially when difficulties arise in following them. The reasoning is simple. The less someone thinks about what is right or wrong, the easier it is for other concerns to take up the slack. For Screwtape, this works well because, deep down, many people don't feel very excited about rigid value systems from the start. I find this point interesting because I realize that this also happens to me sometimes. Like most people, I like to think of myself as someone who has values and generally tries to be as kind as possible. But I can think of several times when I've been less kind than I could have been, simply because I was in a bad mood or had difficult emotions at the time. Although C.S. Lewis talks mainly about how we can drift away from our relationship with God because of everyday worries, I believe this idea can go further. Often, without realizing it, we let our values seem less important, as if they were something we could ignore when we face real-life difficulties or pressures. Even those who don't believe in God can feel the weight of ignoring their own values. When these people act against what they believe, the guilt can be so great that it seems impossible to bear. They can end up becoming someone they no longer recognize, and that can be as painful as any punishment imagined. Although Christianity often values free will and the autonomy of the human soul, C.S. Lewis dedicates a good part of his work to showing how a person's social circle and environment can influence their mind and lead them away from their values. At the beginning, Screwtape comments that the patient spends a lot of time with a friend who is materialistic. Later, the demons ensure that he gets involved with a group of people from high society who see themselves as sophisticated and intellectually superior. The patient wants to impress these new friends, so he starts repeating what they say. When they support morally wrong ideas, he simply agrees or softens his own opinion, without questioning or taking a clear stand. Screwtape wants him to develop a kind of split personality, that he prays in church and sees himself as a good Christian, but that at dinner with his new friends he despises the very values he claims to defend. This state of mind, a combination of self-deception and hypocrisy, is very useful for demons. Little by little, the patient drifts away from their values and begins to act according to what is most convenient at the moment without realizing it. Until one day, he no longer knows what is right or wrong, only what is useful to him. This turns him into someone guided by moral convenience, and since it's often easier to be cruel than kind, it's easier to drive him to brutality. Screwtape explains that one of the most useful mental states for a demon to plant in a person is frivolity, that is, the inability to take any issue, moral or otherwise, seriously. The patient must be encouraged to immerse themselves so deeply in sarcasm and irony that they end up forgetting what they believe in and stop caring about what is true. The scariest thing about all this is that just because we're surrounded by good company, it doesn't mean we're safe from being influenced. This thought by C.S. Lewis shows that pride is not just an isolated flaw, but the habit of thinking too much of oneself. This makes sense, since the demons in Lewis's work use social relationships to gradually weaken the values of their victims, encouraging internal divisions and selfish attitudes. Instead of being humbled by living with people he admires, the patient begins to despise those who are not part of his social circle. His friends in high society divide his mind in two. On the one hand, what he believes to be right. On the other, how he acts to fit in. This internal division is a reflection of the separation he makes between those who are inside and those who are outside his circle. We often look to others for examples of how we should behave. That's why it's important to pay attention to the people we spend our time with, especially if we notice that they are gradually making us colder, more selfish, or cruel. However, Lewis also warns that even friendships based on virtues can end up stimulating our worst sides if they are not well directed. He emphasizes that the feeling of superiority over others has been, and continues to be, the root of many historical atrocities as well as the evil we see in everyday life. This false sense of moral self-sufficiency allows people to do terrible things while still believing they are right or good. Without realizing it, we can end up betraying our own values and harming others, all because of misleading ideas that we are better or superior. I want to talk more about this because the book Letters from a Devil to His Apprentice makes some brilliant observations about how we can fool ourselves into believing that we still follow our values, even when we haven't put them into practice for a long time. In the Confessions, St. Augustine describes wickedness as a form of ignorance. He tells how, before his conversion, his life was full of pleasures that seemed satisfying, but were empty. These pleasures kept him from any real sense of fulfillment, especially when compared to the spiritual glory he found afterwards. This theme is also very important to C.S. Lewis. In his letters, he explores how fantasy and illusion can sustain cruelty and lead people away from goodness. In one of his letters, Screwtape explains that a human being is made up of three main parts: fantasy, intellect, and will. Much of Screwtape's advice focuses on ensuring that good things remain only in the realm of the imagination, while bad feelings such as cruelty, selfishness, and unkindness take over a person's actions and will. For example, Screwtape suggests that the patient imagines great acts of kindness, such as becoming an admired spiritual leader or donating their entire fortune to charity after their death. However, these ideas should be kept as distant dreams, something that will never be realized, but which nevertheless captures the person's imagination, making them feel that they are already being good, even without actually acting. These fantasies make people believe that they have already achieved their goals without actually taking action. Meanwhile, Screwtape encourages bad moods and pride, turning goodness into something only self-interested. What's more, Screwtape encourages people to see themselves as intellectually superior, disregarding the opinions of those who think differently. As Screwtape says, let him console himself by imagining that he has already done a gigantic amount of good for the world, or that he will certainly do so in the future. What are 1,000 petty brutalities compared to the grandeur of his benevolent fantasies? This is a real stroke of evil genius from Screwtape. Screwtape understands that people can be easily fooled into believing that they are naturally good, even when there is little evidence of this in their daily actions. He wants us to imagine that we are kind by nature, even when we are cruel to the people around us. Because of these fantasies, we end up ignoring the small cruelties of everyday life. For example, if we shout at someone in a store or are rude to a friend, it no longer seems important. This way of thinking distances the ideas of good and evil from our real lives, making them seem theoretical and unrelated to our daily actions. We lose sight of the ancient idea that our virtues are shown by what we do, and not just by what we believe ourselves to be. This is exactly what the demons want, because fantasies prevent us from reflecting on how we are living and realizing our mistakes. Instead of thinking about our attitudes, we use our minds to justify cruel behavior and our fantasies to imagine that we are kind. Thus, we fail to see the real impact of our actions and remain trapped in this cycle of self-deception. In the book Letters from the Devil to His Apprentice, it is explained that when people have a moment of epiphany and realize their mistakes, they often go from believing they are good to falling into total despair. They spend so much time seeing themselves as morally correct that when they realize it's not true, they end up going to the other extreme. Like Satan in Milton's Paradise Lost, they may decide that it is better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. This means that because they think they've done too much wrong to change, they start to believe that there's no going back. With this thought, many end up accepting their own cruelty and stop trying to improve. This idea of light is very innovative, as many studies of evil focus only on great atrocities. Sigmund Freud, for example, explored how internal conflicts and repressed desires can lead to destructive behavior, while Albert Camus reflected on how absurdity and the lack of meaning in life can push people towards nihilistic philosophies or desperate choices. However, C.S. Lewis addresses another kind of evil, the kind that is more common, closer to us, the kind of cruelty that anyone can practice on a daily basis. In a striking passage, Screwtape explains that it doesn't matter whether someone is condemned to hell for committing great sins or for a series of small evils. In the end, the result is the same. With this, Lewis reminds us of something uncomfortable. Our small, everyday cruelties are just as real as the great atrocities that have marked history. For example, shouting at someone in traffic, ignoring a call for help because you're in a hurry, or even making a sarcastic comment about a colleague at work. These small acts may seem insignificant, but accumulated, they shape who we are and how we impact others. This leads us to reflect, are we really as good as we believe ourselves to be? Or do we allow our goodness to become more theoretical than practical, while tolerating small evils in our everyday actions? However, in Screwtape's last letter to Wormwood, he is full of anger and frustration. Screwtape scolds Wormwood for letting his victim escape. Now, the victim's mind is protected by God, and the demons can no longer reach it. Here, Lewis underlines his main message. God's grace is what saves people and helps them resist temptation. Even for those who don't believe in God, this idea brings an important reflection. Lewis's first point is that it's never too late to change, whether in religious or secular terms. Recognizing our small misdeeds can be painful, but it's the first step towards transforming them. Lewis elevates the impact of everyday actions by relating them to the forces of good and evil, showing that even the simplest choices have great importance. The man, now protected by God, hasn't performed any of the great heroic deeds he used to imagine in his fantasies. Instead, he dedicates himself to practicing simple kindness, praying for his daily food, and for the strength to do good in the coming hours. He has transformed himself into an impressive combination of normality and sanctity. Before, he was a reflection of the small cruelties we see every day. Now, he represents ordinary kindness. He's like the person who gives you a subway ticket you're no longer going to use, or the stranger who stops in the street to ask if you're okay. Just as the road to hell is paved by small sins, the road to heaven is built by small, humble virtues. This is a very encouraging message in Lewis, serving as a perfect contrast to the earlier discussion about the impact of everyday evil. We cannot ignore the fact that, for Lewis, God plays an essential role in explaining everyday goodness. This leads us to an important question. What does it take to resist the temptation of evil and remain firm in the face of situations that push us towards the wrong choices? The answer lies in personal responsibility. This reflection brings us to the uncomfortable truth that Lewis highlights. We all carry within us the potential for both good and evil. We are beings full of contradictions, capable of heroic deeds and profound cruelty. Choosing between these two paths is not something we do once. It is a constant struggle that we face every day. Light invites us to see this duality within ourselves, to understand that evil is not only in distant places or monsters, but also within each one of us. Recognizing this truth and accepting that we have the capacity for both helps us, as Carl Jung would say, to have more control over our choices and to make decisions that reflect our true essence. This awareness not only makes us better people, but also more conscious, ready to act with intention rather than being dragged along by situational forces. It's important to understand that the line between good and evil isn't just an abstract idea, it's present in our daily choices. Knowing this gives you a special power, something that many people don't have. You're not just another person who follows the crowd or gives in to the pressures around you. By being aware of the forces that can lead you down the wrong path, you gain the responsibility to use them to your advantage. This awareness gives you the tools you need to resist. In the end, it's not just about avoiding evil, but actively choosing to do good. The choice between good and evil doesn't happen in a single grand moment. It's made up of a series of small decisions on a daily basis. Every time you choose to stand up for what is right, every time you resist the pressure of others and recognize the humanity in the people around you, you are confronting the forces that try to pull you away from who you really are. This struggle is not easy and will not always be clear, but it is essential. The author makes it clear that doing good is not simple. Throughout the letters, we see examples of people who believe they are being loving, but are actually just feeding their own pride or desire for control. For Lewis, developing a genuine and constant care for others is a long and difficult task, but it's worth the effort. If you are religious, this may be motivated by the hope of a reward in another life. But even if you're not, practicing kindness and empathy contributes to making this world a calmer, more serene, and kinder place for everyone. C.S. Lewis warns us about how fragile human morality can be and how easy it is to stray from the path of kindness through small, almost imperceptible everyday cruelties. He reminds us that the real danger lies not only in bad actions, but in the illusions we create to believe we are better than our attitudes really show. The line between good and evil is not something distant or abstract. It is present in every decision and attitude we make, helping to shape who we are. Lewis challenges us to recognize this duality within us and to commit ourselves to goodness, not through grand heroic gestures or unattainable perfection, but through small acts of true kindness. These small gestures, when added together, can transform both ourselves and the world around us.